Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And today we're going to continue talking about our featured work of literature for this month, the month of July. The Secret Garden.
Yeah.
Which is appropriate, I suppose, because it's summertime. It's a good time to head out and work in the garden, work with plants. And don't worry, if you live in an apartment, you could probably have plants on your balcony or something like that.
Maybe you want to go out in the garden when it's really early because it's hot.
Possibly. And, of course, if you don't want to go out in the blistering hot weather, then you can stay home, turn on the AC, or go to the library, and then you wouldn't have to pay the electric bill, and read a book there.
True.
And maybe you can read this month's featured story, The Secret Garden. And last time we summarized our featured story. It's all about Mary Lennox. She's spoiled, selfish, but she goes to live with her uncle in Yorkshire. And later on, she meets a couple of boys there, and she also finds this part of the garden there, and that kind of changes her life. She becomes less selfish, and she helps out that boy there, who's actually her cousin, the son of Mr. Craven. He thinks he's terminally ill, but she gets him to go outside into the garden, and he has a new outlook on life. He turns over a new leaf, and of course, Mr. Craven is delighted to see that his son is now a happy young boy.
Yeah, we're going to go ahead and read through today's lesson, and then we'll be back to talk more about this author, Frances Hodgson Burnett.
Frances Hodgson Burnett was born in Manchester, England in 1849 and was the third of 5 siblings. Though her family was financially secure at first, they began to struggle after her father passed away in 1852. Thus, she spent her younger years in a series of less comfortable homes. Despite these difficulties, however, she was a brilliant student and a keen reader. She wrote stories while still in her teens, though she only attended school until the age of 15. Eventually, in 1865, the family's reduced circumstances led them to move to the U.S., and they settled in Knoxville, Tennessee. Still struggling with poverty, they found themselves living in a simple log cabin. It was while living in Tennessee that Burnett became a professional author. Wanting to help support her family, she began writing stories and selling them to magazines. Writing quickly became a profitable occupation, and the money Burnett earned from her work helped the family immensely. In 1873, she married Swan Burnett, a medical student, and a few years later the couple relocated, first to Paris, France, and then to Washington, D.C., U.S. Her first novel, The Lass o' Lowries, was published in 1876. The Burnett's marriage proved unhappy, and after spending more and more time apart, the couple divorced in 1898. That same year, Burnett began renting a large English country house with gardens, which inspired her to write a story about a little girl and a special garden. Along with A Little Princess, 1905, The Secret Garden, 1911, became one of her best-known works and is still beloved by readers today. She returned to the U.S. in 1907 and continued writing until her death in 1924.
Okay, guys, let's get started on our day 2 of our literature unit. We're going to talk about the author, Frances Hodgson Burnett. She was actually born in Manchester, England, which is, at the time at least, was a very big industrial town. Lots of factories, dirty air. So that's where she was born, and it happened back in 1849. I was just saying to Tom, she was a middle child. At least Americans, we have things we believe about. If you're the oldest child, you have a certain type of personality. And if you're a middle child, you sometimes get ignored. You don't get as much attention as the older or the younger siblings. But she was the third of 5 siblings. So she had 4 either brothers or sisters. We're not really sure. You might want to check that out to get more info. But sibling just means either a brother or sister. It doesn't necessarily mean male or female. I have 7 siblings. There are 8 kids in my family, which is quite a bit, and I'm number 2. So she was in the middle there, and I bet she probably had quite an imagination to keep herself occupied. Her family was financially secure at first. Look at that. Those are 2 important words, at first. We find out that later on they began to struggle financially because her father, sadly, he passed away in 1852. She was quite young. She probably never got to know her father and probably didn't remember him because I don't remember things when I was that young. If you're financially secure, it means you have enough money to pay your bills and some extra that you can, use just to do something that's a little more interesting, entertaining than just paying your rent and your utilities, your gas, water, electricity bills. Those are your utilities. And if you're secure, you feel confident about the future. You don't worry so much. If you're financially insecure or financially unstable, you probably don't have a stable income where it's the same amount every month. It changes based on what you do. It can be very stressful if you are financially insecure or financially unstable.
Yep, you don't want to be financially unstable. That's why you probably should consider a career in business or in engineering or in computer programming.
Except that a lot of Taiwanese like to own their own businesses.
Certainly, they want to be the boss. And
yeah.
yes, fewer people want to study to be an artist or something like that. It's just not financially secure. Nobody can afford a house if you're waiting tables all the time. But in this particular case, yes, she was born in Manchester, England, and her family was financially secure at first, but the father passed away in 1852 when she was about 3. Therefore, she spent her younger years in a series of less comfortable homes. So the breadwinner of the family was gone. So money was tight for their family, so I guess she had to live in less comfortable homes, maybe English cottages or something in the countryside or something like that, with bugs and rats and stuff like that. So despite these difficulties, however, she was a brilliant student and a keen reader. So here, brilliant can mean it's very bright, okay, but also in this particular case, it means that you are very, very clever, you're smart, you're talented, etc. So she did well in school, basically. And she was a keen reader. If you're keen, you're enthusiastic about something and you do it all the time. I'm a keen reader. For example, if you read books all the time, I'm a keen fan of football, for example. I like to watch soccer games, especially if they're teams from Manchester, England, like Manchester City or Manchester United. So she read a lot. We could also say she was a voracious reader, which means she read a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like she was very interested in books and stories and creative thinking. She actually began to write while she was still in her teens. Good for her. Though she only attended school until the age of 15. Back then, and in England in particular, if you didn't have enough money, kids would typically maybe get to go to elementary school and then they were done. Your family had to have some money for you to continue on. So sadly, she only got to go to school until the age of 15. I'm sure some of the students listening are thinking, oh, cool. I wish I could drop out. No, not back then. Going to school was a privilege, and learning to read was a privilege. There were so many of the lower classes in England in particular that could not read or write. So we're actually very blessed to live in this day and age where we are forced in some ways to go to school. You have to, because education is really important to your success in the future. So she started writing when she was quite young, remember that? And she probably spent all the free time, and they didn't have a lot back then because they were probably trying to make enough money to pay their bills, to eat even. So she did like writing even at a young age. So we can see that it was something that was within her at a young age. A lot of people know what they want to do, before they're even 20.
Exactly. So, of course, they weren't doing so well there. So, eventually, in 1865, the family's reduced circumstances, their financial situation, led them to move to the USA, and they settled in Knoxville, Tennessee, which of course is where Memphis is, and Nashville is there. Of course, Knoxville is in eastern Tennessee, I believe. And so they lived there in Tennessee, and still struggling with poverty, they found themselves living in a simple log cabin. Remember, this was back in the 1800s, so they lived in Tennessee, but they didn't get to live in a nice house. They actually lived in a humble house made out of logs, a log cabin. Logs are parts of the tree after it is cut down into like cylinders, basically. A cylindrical piece of wood is a log, but when you cut it down into boards and stuff like that, then it's wood or lumber. But logs are raw wood in that shape. So the house there was made out of logs, and lots of people lived in log cabins back in those days, but not so much anymore.
So still struggling with poverty. Poverty just means the state of being very, very poor, extremely poor. They found themselves living in the simple log cabin, as Tom has described. There are a lot of log cabins, especially in the wild, wild west. And Tennessee at that point was pretty wild still. I wanted to mention, if you were born in England and you were born poor, you died poor. That's why a lot of people were immigrating to America, because we didn't have such a difficult system between the high class, the middle class, and the low class. If you worked hard, you could earn money and be wealthy and be successful. So a lot of these people who weren't born wealthy or had difficult circumstances, they moved to America to see if they could try their hand and live a better life there. And that's what her family did. We're going to continue talking about Frances Hodgson Burnett. But first, guys, we're going to listen to our Chinese teacher.
Hello everyone, my name is Tina. 我们今天要介绍的是《秘密花园》这个写书的作者，他的名字叫做 Frances Hodgson Burnett。他是出生于英国曼彻斯特。首先来看到在第一段的第二个句子提到 Though her family was financially secure at first, they began to struggle after her father passed away in 1852. 这里提到，虽然他的家庭一刚开始的经济状况相当的稳定，这里我们用了 financially secure 这样子的字词。Financially 指的是财务上的、财政上的 ，secure 形容词则是有牢靠的、稳当的意思。举个例子来说。His place in history is now secure. 指的呢，就是他在历史上的地位现在已经相当的稳固了。虽然家庭一刚开始还不错，但是在父亲过世之后呢，就开始有些困难了。在这里我们用了一个动词 struggle， 也就是有挣扎跟奋斗的意思。接着我们来看到第一段后面的倒数第二个句子提到Eventually, in 1865, the family's reduced circumstances led them to move to the U.S., and they settled in Knoxville, Tennessee. 最终呢，到了西元1865年的时候，这个家庭的落魄状况呢，导致他们搬到了美国。Reduced circumstances 指的是呢家境不好，而 reduce 本来就是有减少跟缩小的意思。Circumstance 常常呢是用来复数，指的是经济状况或者是你所碰到的一些境遇境况。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, let's continue with our lesson. Again, we're talking about the author of The Secret Garden in today's lesson. And remember, her name is Frances Hodgson Burnett. Okay, I think she was actually born Frances Hodgson.
She was.
And later she got married to someone by the name of Burnett. But it was while living in Tennessee that Frances, yes.
Tom, can I mention?
Sure.
That's called your maiden name, guys. If women get married, that's their married name. Some ladies are taking their husband's name still, some aren't, whatever they want. But your name that you were born with, that last name is called your maiden name, M-A-I-D-E-N.
That was her maiden name, Hodgson.
Yeah.
And it was while living in Tennessee that Burnett became a professional author. So she was living in Tennessee and she thought, hey, I'm a good reader. I know a lot, so I can write stories, and maybe some magazines will publish those stories. And wanting to help support her family, she began writing stories and selling them to magazines. Back then, magazines and newspapers would publish stories, which would later be bound into books for sale. I think they still do that a little bit.
Yeah, they would print one chapter one week, and then the following week would be chapter 2. So it got people to continue to have interest in buying the magazine.
Exactly. So she found the newspaper. And so we could say she found her calling there. So writing quickly became a profitable occupation. Occupation basically is your job. And if it's profitable, that means you're making money. Of course, you want your company to be profitable. Otherwise, you'll go bankrupt and you'll have to close. But she was a profitable writer here. She was making money, and the money she earned from her work helped the family immensely. They were suffering. They were not doing well financially. So, of course, she brought in money from writing, and that helped out the family a lot. Immensely here is the adverb for immense, which means really, really big. That building is immense. Or that mountain is immense. And immensely here is the adverb. So, of course, it's describing the word help. Helped the family a lot. Helped them immensely.
So in 1873, she married a guy named Swan Burnett. I'm just going to guess here. I doubt that that was his real name. Probably a nickname, Swan. I wouldn't call anyone Swan, but that was the name of this guy. He was a medical student, so he was studying to become a doctor. Back then, medical knowledge, medical science wasn't very advanced, but they were learning very quickly. Of course, they got better and better over time. Thank goodness we have the medicine we have today. But he was studying in medical school. They did have some schools that would focus just on medicine, but it wasn't the long process that our doctors go through today, which I think they go through like 8-10 years before they're actually able to practice as a real doctor. A few years later, after they got married, the couple relocated. If you relocate, guys, it just means you are perhaps currently living in Taipei and you decide, there's some great job opportunities in Hong Kong. We're going to relocate to Hong Kong. Or maybe you relocate within Taiwan. We're going to move to Taidong because, we heard about some great job offers there, and wow, it's a pretty area of Taiwan. So they relocated. First, they went to Paris, France. So that was their first stop. They lived there for a while. And then they went on to Washington, D.C., back again in the U.S. Her first novel, That Lass o' Lowry's, was published in 1876. So up to that point, she'd been writing and selling stories to magazines. But this was her first novel, which probably felt like a huge achievement back then. And even for women writers, it was even difficult to get published, especially in that time period, the late 1800s. It wasn't easy to get published, and a lot of women would choose male names and hide the fact that they were women in order to get their books published.
Okay, so that was her first novel here, That Lass, or That Lady of someone by the name of Lowry. And the Burnett's marriage proved unhappy, and after spending more and more time apart, the couple divorced in 1898. So it lasted, more than 20 years there. But, of course, eventually they got kind of sick of each other. They took each other for granted, and they decided, hey, I think we should just split here. So they got divorced. You can get divorced, or you can can divorce. You can say it both ways here. Get divorced is more common, though. Like my grandparents divorced in 1967, as an example there. But they divorced in 1898, and that same year, Burnett began renting a large English country house with gardens, which inspired her to write a story about a little girl and a special garden. So she got divorced there, and I guess she decided, well, I've got a lot of money here. The U.S. is a nice place, of course, but, I think I'm going to move back to England there. And so she bought a country house there. Well, she didn't buy it. She rented it, okay? If you rent something, of course, you pay someone money so that you can use the property. You might rent an apartment, for example, rent an apartment, or rent a business, for example. Of course, that's why businesses are closing all the time.
Wait, how do you rent a business?
Oh, well, the business is yours. I guess you rent the place.
Oh, the space for your business?
Okay, that's it. Yeah, the space.
Okay, cool.
And so you see lots of, restaurants closing. It's not because the restaurant was doing poorly. It's because the landlord raised the rent, and they couldn't afford it, so they had to close shop. They had to close the business.
Yeah.
So, of course, here she rented a large English country house that had gardens. It was big enough. And so, because it had gardens, she was inspired to write a story. Hey, I like the gardens of this house that I'm renting. Maybe I could write a story about a little girl who goes into that special garden.
So, of course, that was inspirational to her. A lot of people, a lot of writers get their inspiration from different places. And, of course, a lot of writers will take inspiration directly from their own lives. And that's what she did here. And she came up with this really cool story that has been very popular over time. That's why it's called a classic. People still read it and they love it. I don't know A Little Princess, but if you enjoy reading The Secret Garden, you might want to check out, along with the Secret Garden, check out her book, A Little Princess, that she published a little earlier. The Secret Garden is still beloved by readers today. This word beloved is also sometimes pronounced beloved. My beloved dog passed away last year. But if it's beloved, it's really well loved, really well liked by readers everywhere. It's been turned into films, Broadway musicals, shorter books. So if you go, I'm going to give an example to Cave Books. Cave's Books has a shorter version, which is very doable. You can read it. It's not difficult at all. Check it out.
Indeed. So, yes, indeed, this book is loved by people even today. So she returned to the U.S. in 1907 and continued writing until her death in 1924. And as far as I know, she has been dead since then. She hasn't come back. Usually when people die, they don't come back to life. So, of course, she's been dead since 1924, but she still lives on in her books. So, yes, you can probably bring her back to life if you read some of her books here. And I'm sure she talks a lot about her experiences living in houses that had gardens. Check it out. Okay, that brings us to the end of our explanation for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
接着我们来看到第二段的第一个句子提到 It was while living in Tennessee that Burnett became a professional author. 在这里要特别强调的是这个句型的用法 It was that 用来强调呢一种我们要强调的部分，像这里要强调的是 while living in Tennessee， 那么我们中文就要翻译成为正是他居住在田纳西州的这一段期间，而 Burnett 就成为了一个专职的作家。所以在这里呢，我们可以在这边放是名词或者是时间副词或地方副词来当做一种强调的用法。接着在这一段的中间句子提到 Writing quickly became a profitable occupation, and the money Burnett earned from her work helped the family immensely. 所以呢，写作很快就成为一个赚钱的职业。Profitable 指的就是有利润的。举例来说，这个农场呢是一个盈利颇丰的企业，我们就可以说 The farm is a highly profitable business. 而透过写作，他所赚的钱也大大的帮助了这个家庭。我们用了 immensely 这个副词，有极大的、极其的意思。我听到这个消息，真是高兴极了。你就可以说 I was immensely pleased to hear the news。然而 Burnett 他的婚姻结果并不快乐，到了1898年就离婚了。接着我们来看到最后一段的第二个句子提到 That same year, Burnett began renting a large English country house with gardens, which inspired her to write a story about a little girl and a special garden.在离婚的同样一年呢，这位作家开始租借了一间富有花园的英式乡间别墅，而这就给了他灵感，写下了这一篇有关于一个女孩跟花园的故事。我们来注意一下，在逗号这里的 which 就是指着呢这样子带有着花园的乡间别墅 inspire 给了他灵感。我们来看一下 inspire 有鼓舞、激励或是给予灵感去做什么事情的意思，所以我们说 inspire somebody to do something， 也就是有激励或是给予某人灵感去做某件事情。举例来说，他的演讲鼓舞了我们要再一次的去尝试。His speech inspired us to try again。那如果你想激励某人要更加的努力，你也可以说 to inspire somebody to greater efforts。而在这里呢，他的作品除了《秘密花园》之外，还有其他都受到读者的喜爱。那么他一直持续写作，直到他在1924年辞世。OK， 以上就是今天的课文讲解，谢谢收听。
Okay, we've come to the end of our program for today, but please join us again next time when we continue to talk about the secret garden and some of the themes and ideas in the story and why we think you might enjoy reading it. Until then, from all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Bye.
Bye.